There was a version of you that woke up early, set an alarm for 6:15 even on days off, made coffee before the light changed, sat by the window watching the street come alive below. You liked that hour, the city still half asleep, the quiet before everything turned loud and demanding. You felt like you had a secret, that you'd already taken something from the day before anyone else had gotten to it. You'd sit there with both hands around the mug and watch the delivery trucks and the dog walkers and the occasional insomniac moving through the gray morning light, and you felt, in a way you couldn't have articulated, that you were exactly where you were supposed to be. That version of you had a job, a decent one, data entry for a logistics firm on the 14th floor of a building downtown, nothing glamorous, but you were good at it and the people were fine, and every other Friday a number appeared in your bank account that meant rent was handled and there was still something left over. Enough for dinner somewhere that wasn't your kitchen. Enough for a book, a concert ticket, small things that made the week feel like it was building toward something. That version of you called his mother on Sundays. Not always for long. Sometimes just 10 minutes. Just enough to hear her voice and let her hear yours. She'd ask about work and you'd tell her it was fine and she'd say, "That's good, that's good." And there was comfort in the smallness of it, in the fact that someone expected your call. You should try to remember him clearly, that earlier version of yourself. Try to hold the details, the alarm, the coffee, the window, the Sunday calls. Hold them carefully because they become difficult to locate later, buried under other things, and there will come a point where you'll need to remember that he existed, that you were him once. His name was the same as yours. He lived in the same apartment. He just made different choices. You have known Danny Reese since the 7th grade, when he defended you in front of 3 older kids behind the gymnasium by saying something so unexpectedly funny that everyone forgot they were supposed to be threatening. You can still remember it? The way the tension broke, the laughter, the oldest kid shaking his head and walking away. That was Danny. He could diffuse anything with the right word at the right moment. He had a gift for reading a room and knowing exactly what it needed, whether that was a joke or silence or just someone sitting next to you without asking questions. You were inseparable through high school. Weekends at each other's houses, the kind of friendship that doesn't need maintaining because it simply exists, the way certain things simply exist. You drifted some in your 20s the way people do. Different cities for a while, different jobs, different rhythms, a stretch where months went by without much contact. But he always came back around. Showed up at your door with beer and a bad idea and that grin he had, and within an hour it was like no time had passed at all. That was the thing about Danny Reese. He always came back. He was there the night everything started, though he didn't know what he was witnessing. Neither did you, not really. You thought it was just a party. You thought it was just one night. It was at Marcus Chen's place, a guy you knew from a previous job, not a party exactly. More like 6 or 7 people in a too-warm apartment on a Thursday. Someone's playlist too loud, 2 separate conversations happening at the same time. You didn't want to be there. You'd been going through something for a while by then, a bad stretch, the kind that doesn't have a clean explanation you can give to people who ask how you're doing. Your position at the logistics firm had been eliminated 3 months earlier as part of a restructuring. That was the word they used, restructuring, as though your livelihood were a piece of furniture being moved to a better location. The girl you'd been with for 4 months had ended it with a text that you'd read so many times the words had stopped meaning anything. You were behind on rent for the first time in your adult life, and the gap between who you believed you would be by now and who you actually were had become something physical, something you carried in your chest everywhere you went, heaviest in the mornings when you woke up and remembered. Danny was across the room when it happened, laughing at something, a drink in his hand, entirely unaware. Someone pressed a small folded piece of paper into your palm. Inside was a gray powder, finer than anything you'd seen before, almost luminescent in the apartment light. "Just try it," they said. "You look like you need it." You thought about saying no. You thought about finding Danny and going home. You thought about a lot of things in the handful of seconds between receiving the paper and making the choice. You remember thinking, just this once. Just this once is something people say right before it stops being just this once. The first time felt like being forgiven, not euphoria. Nothing so dramatic, nothing so obvious. More like the sudden and total absence of everything that had been pressing down on you. The debt, the failure, the gap, the weight you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing it as separate from yourself. All of it simply lifted, like setting down something heavy you'd forgotten you were holding. For about 4 hours you existed without it, and you understood, in those 4 hours, in a way that was cellular and absolute, why people destroyed their lives for this feeling, why they traded everything for it. You understood, and you told yourself you wouldn't, and you meant it completely. You went back 11 days later, then 7 days after that, then 4. Then the gaps between stopped being measurable in days. The substance is a gray powder that dissolves under the tongue in approximately 30 seconds. It takes 4 minutes to work. You know this with the precision of someone who has checked the clock hundreds of times, standing in the kitchen or the bathroom or wherever you happen to be, watching the second hand and willing it to move faster. It doesn't produce anything showy. No hallucinations, no giddiness, no performance of being altered. It simply removes the weight, makes everything soft and distant and survivable in a way that nothing else does anymore. The problem, and you knew this, you always knew this, some part of you filed it carefully and kept track, is that everything outside of it becomes progressively less survivable in proportion to how much you use it. The baseline shifts. What was ordinary becomes unbearable. What was bearable becomes impossible. You are always chasing the distance between who you are and how it makes you feel, and that distance only ever grows. You lost the new job, the one you'd gotten 2 months after the restructuring, a different firm, similar work, a fresh start you'd been genuinely optimistic about because you stopped showing up reliably. Mornings became difficult, then impossible. You lost it on a Tuesday and sat in the apartment afterward and felt almost nothing, which told you something important about where you were that you chose not to examine too closely. The people stopped coming around. Your brother first, after an argument you have only fragmentary memory of. Voices raised in the hallway outside your door, his face doing something you'd never seen it do before. Then the others, quietly, one by one, the way people exit a situation they've decided they can't fix. No confrontations, no ultimatums, no dramatic exits. Just absence. Spaces where people used to be, slowly closing over like water. Danny stayed. Danny always stayed. He'd come over and sit with you, and sometimes he'd try to talk about it, and sometimes he wouldn't. And you loved him for knowing which one you needed without asking. He looked at you differently as the months went on, something in his eyes that you couldn't name and didn't want to, something between grief and patience, like a man waiting for a train he's not sure is coming. You have to stop, he told you once, at the kitchen table, both hands flat on the surface, looking at you with that look. I know, you said. I mean it. You actually have to stop. I know, Danny. He looked at you for a long time. Something moved across his face and then settled. He nodded slowly and let it go, and you told yourself that meant it wasn't as serious as it sometimes felt. That if Danny was letting it go, it couldn't be as bad as all that. You were not honest with yourself about how bad it was. Her name is Claire Ashworth, and you have been in love with her since the elevator. This was before the worst of it, 8 or 9 months ago, when you still went outside with some regularity and had reasons to be places. She got on at the 4th floor with too many grocery bags. the reusable kind that were clearly overpacked, and you held the door and then held out your hand for one of the bags without thinking, and she looked at you for a second like she was deciding something, and then handed it over. "Thank you," she said when the doors opened at the lobby. A real smile, not a polite one, the kind that reaches the eyes. You thought about that smile for 4 days. You learned her schedule, the way you learn things you're paying close attention to without meaning to. She leaves at 8:15 most mornings, coffee cup in one hand, bag over one shoulder, coat slightly too big for her as though she bought it for a different version of herself that never quite materialized. She comes home between 6 and 7, sometimes later. On Sunday, she sits on the front steps for a while in the afternoon and reads. And sometimes she looks up from the page at nothing in particular with an expression you have spent a significant amount of time trying to interpret. Something between contentment and longing. Something you recognize. You have never spoken to her beyond the elevator. Every time you've been close enough, passing in the hall, waiting for the same door, something stops you. The thought of her looking at you directly, seeing what you've become in these months, produces a terror that overrides everything else. So you don't. You find reasons not to. Danny thinks this is the most insane thing he's ever heard. She smiled at you, he says. A real smile. You said so yourself. That was a long time ago. It was 8 months ago. She doesn't know me now. She could. You look at him and he looks at you, and neither of you says what you're both thinking, which is that the version of you she met in the elevator no longer exists in any meaningful way, and the version sitting here now is not someone you'd introduce to anyone you wanted to impress. You watch her from the window sometimes, not in a way you could defend if someone asked you to. Just, you see her on the sidewalk below, and something in your chest does something that almost feels like being alive. Like there's a version of the future that branches off from right now where you knock on her door and she opens it, and you are somehow still the person who held the elevator door, and none of the rest of this is the shape of your life. You never knock. 3 weeks ago, she stopped on the sidewalk directly below your window and looked up. Not at the building generally, at your window specifically. She stood there for a long moment, long enough that it couldn't have been accidental, long enough that you felt seen even though you were standing back from the glass, even though you were half hidden by the curtain. You stepped further back into the shadow and stood very still. She stood there a moment longer, looking at glass and curtain and whatever her eyes decided to make of the gray afternoon light. Then she shook her head, barely, almost imperceptibly, and walked on. You told yourself she was distracted. You've been telling yourself a lot of things. Small details have been wrong for a while now, and you have been filing them carefully in the part of your mind reserved for things you're not ready to look at directly. The calendar on your phone has not changed in weeks. October 14th, every time you check it, regardless of what you do to fix it. You've uninstalled the app, restarted the phone, checked the settings. October 14th. You've decided it's a software issue and moved on because the question you'd have to ask if it isn't a software issue is one you're not prepared to ask. Danny never eats. You have known Danny Reese for over 20 years, and in all of those years, across hundreds of shared meals and late nights and long drives, you cannot produce a single clear memory of him actually eating anything. He is always present. He is always exactly where you need him to be. But he exists at the periphery of meals, at the edges of rooms, always watching, never quite participating. You brought this up once, carefully, watching his face for a reaction. He looked at you for longer than the question warranted. Then he said he'd had a big lunch. You let it go. Mrs. Patel in 1B has fed the pigeons on the front steps every morning without exception for the entire 2 years you've lived in this building. She has said hello to you every single day. Last month, she walked directly toward you in the hallway, eye contact close enough to touch, and past you without a flicker of recognition, as though you were a piece of the wall, as though you were not there. You stood in the hallway for a long time after she rounded the corner. The maintenance man came about the radiator and spent 40 minutes in your apartment without once acknowledging your presence. You spoke to him twice. He moved around you the way you move around furniture. The supply is almost gone. 3 days left, maybe 4 if you're careful, and you are never careful. And this fact has colonized every other thought until it is the only thought. A low, constant alarm underneath everything. You call the number. It rings and rings. You become aware, standing in the kitchen in the late afternoon light, phone pressed to your ear, that you cannot remember the last time anyone answered, that this ringing has been going on for weeks, that it has become so familiar, so much a part of the texture of your days, that it stopped registering as unanswered at some point and became simply a sound you make, like breathing. How long have you been calling a deadline? How long have you been doing a lot of things? October 14th, October 14th, October 14th. Danny is in the chair by the window when you put the phone down. Not at the edge of the room, not leaning against anything. Sitting directly across from you in the chair, both feet on the floor, hands on his knees, with the posture of a man who has made a decision. His face is different. The familiar version of it, the jokes, the deflection, the careful management of difficult moments is gone. What's underneath is something older, something that has been there the whole time under everything else, waiting. How long have you known, you say? Your voice sounds wrong in the room. Flat, like it isn't moving through the air correctly. He doesn't answer right away, and you let him take his time because you already know the shape of the answer and you need a moment too. Danny, a while, he says. I was waiting for you to get there yourself. I couldn't tell you directly. That's not, he pauses, looks for the word. That's not how any of this works. You look at your hands for a long time. You think about the calendar, the phone that rings into nothing, Mrs. Patel's eyes moving through you like you were made of air, the maintenance man working around you like you were part of the room, Claire on the sidewalk below looking up at a window, tilting her head slightly, seeing nothing but glass and curtain and gray October light. Seeing nothing. The substance, you say. It kept me here. He nods. It kept you attached, tethered to the place. It's heavier than you are now. It held you to it when you should have moved on. How long? He tells you. The number is larger than you expected and smaller than it feels. You sit with it. October 14th resolves into something other than a glitch, a fixed point, a last coordinate, the final day the calendar had any reason to change. Is it bad, you say? Where I'm going. Danny stands up slowly. And here is the thing about Danny Reese. The thing you have circled for months without landing on, the thing the powder kept soft and distant and just out of reach, the thing that explains the edges of rooms, the uneaten meals, the patience of a man with nowhere else to be and nothing else to wait for. Danny has been dead since 2019. A wet road on a November night, a car that came from the wrong direction, a phone call you received at 11:43 in the evening that you have never fully processed because processing it would have meant putting it somewhere inside you permanently, and you were never ready to do that. You went to the funeral. You stood at the grave in the November cold and felt the kind of grief that has no floor, that you keep expecting to find the bottom of and never do. He came back anyway. Because that's what Danny does. Because some part of him, the part that diffused things with the right word, that showed up at your door with beer and a bad idea, that stayed when everyone else found reasons not to. That part could not leave you here alone. So it didn't. He holds out his hand, and he smiles at you. And it is the saddest smile you have ever seen on a human face, full of every year, every wasted morning, every Sunday you didn't call, every moment you spent at a window watching a life you were too afraid to walk toward. No, he says softly. It isn't bad. You look at the window one last time. The street below is quiet, Sunday light on wet pavement, the front steps empty, pigeons gone, Mrs. Patel back inside. The city going about its business the way it always has, with or without you in it, indifferent and ongoing and alive. Somewhere 3 floors down, a door closes. You think of an elevator, too many grocery bags, a coat slightly too big, someone on the sidewalk looking up at a window and finding nothing there, shaking her head almost imperceptibly, walking on. You think of your mother's voice on a Sunday morning, small and warm and expecting you. You let all of it go, not because it doesn't matter, because it did, and that's enough, and you are so tired. You take Danny's hand. The apartment goes quiet in a way it never has before. Not silent, but emptied, the way a room feels after the last person has left and before anyone has noticed they're gone. The way a breath feels when you stop holding it. October 14th becomes October 15th.